Remember, if you enjoy what we do at The Spectator, you can subscribe to the magazine and to our online content. To subscribe today, go to spectator.co.uk/TV offer. The National Health Service turned 74 this week. In recent years, the Health Service has received billions upon billions of extra funding from the taxpayer, but public satisfaction with the Health Service is at its lowest in 20 years. What's going on? I'm joined now by our assistant editor, Isabel Hardman. Isabel, thanks for joining Spectator TV. So this week marks the 74th birthday of the National Health Service, but celebrations seem somewhat muted this year. Can you give us a sense of what's going on in the NHS at the moment?
Well, I think things are pretty miserable in the NHS at the moment, which is why you didn't see that much celebrating. In fact, I spent quite a lot of Tuesday talking to NHS figures, and it was only sort of halfway through the calls and the meetings that we suddenly remembered, oh yes, it's the birthday. So that's sort of mentally where they are. There's the backlog, which if you talk to people working within the health service, they'll say they're doing their very best to tackle as quickly as they can, and they thought they were doing okay, but the latest wave of COVID is again really affecting them, and is slowing progress because of staff absences and so on. There's also these efficiency savings that the NHS is being expected to make. It's supposed to double its efficiency rate to 2.2%, which is a huge ask of the health service in any circumstances, but with inflation, there's a lot of worries that's going to be a real squeeze in terms of how much everything costs. And that's something that Amanda Pritchard, who is the Chief Executive of NHS England, has already been laying down markers. She gave a speech to the NHS Confederation last week where she said that budgets can only stretch so far, and you can see the NHS saying either it can't meet those targets, which Pritchard at the moment is saying it can, or just trying to push back against any suggestion from ministers. And obviously, currently, I believe Steve Barclay is still the Health Secretary. He's very into efficiencies, that they might try to squeeze things further.
Well, I was going to say it's difficult to talk about what the government thinks when it comes to the NHS, seeing as the government is currently collapsing all around us. But ministers previous to this current upset in Westminster and whoever forms the next government going forward, do you think they're waking up to the realities facing the NHS?
Yes and no. So I think that the Treasury is not, and the reason I say that is that it had blocked very forcefully any attempts to do proper workforce planning, which would, in the long term, help the NHS to be more efficient, because it is hugely inefficient if you have massive gaps on your rotas, if you have so many vacancies within the health service, if you cannot actually perform the operations that you need to, because you just don't have the nurses, you don't have the doctors, and so on. And this is a sort of ongoing problem. In terms of the other aspect of reality, which is I think a point that you make a fair bit, Kate, which is about the actual sustainability of the NHS as it is. I mean, politically, that is really, really difficult. And recently there was a paper that Tony Blair published that argued that the current model is not sustainable. And I have to say, having just finished writing a history of the NHS for its 75th birthday, I've heard that phrase so many times. I think it starts to appear from the sort of late 1960s onwards, that the Bevan and Beveridge model no longer works in today's society. The problem is that the solutions to that, there are the sort of outlier solutions of scrapping it and going for something completely different, insurance-based model, which is not only in America but in other countries in Europe, and does work well for people in Europe. So it's always worth pointing out that it's not the UK or America, and those are the only two models in the whole world. We do have a slightly bigger world than that. or changing some of the structures within the health service. And this is the point that Tony Blair has been making, that he wants to basically collapse the central control over the health service and give integrated care boards, which are responsible for the commissioning and provision of NHS services, control over pretty much everything. That's just not going to work with the DNA of the NHS, which, you know, was set up to be a highly centralised, highly controlled system. That was one of Bevan's objectives in nationalising the hospitals. It was one of the things that he said himself, that he would be the chief receiver of complaints. And ever since then, whether health secretaries have legally been responsible for this or legally distanced from that, they have always ended up talking about the bedpans that have been dropped in hospitals hundreds of miles away. They have always ended up forcing out chief executives who aren't performing, whether or not that's their legal duty. I mean, there's a quote by Alan Johnson, for instance, about mid-staffs, where he had civil servants buzzing around him saying, "Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that," and he just turned around and said, "Piss off, I'm dealing with this." And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is the public expect ministers to answer questions on everything when it comes to the health service, and I don't quite see how that's going to change.
The Spectator Data Hub is keeping track of public satisfaction with the NHS, and at the moment there are actually more people who say they're quite or very dissatisfied with its performance compared to those who are satisfied. But what should we read into those quite headline statistics?
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting dynamics there. One is the political dynamic of who do the public blame, and they tend to blame the politicians who they think are underfunding, not supporting the health service properly. There's also the thing that particularly the later Labour years, the politicians then really picked up, which was the "but we're lucky" dynamic. So you get people saying, "Oh, the NHS is in a terrible state, but we're lucky with our local hospital," and sort of still bought into it at a local level, which can be hugely frustrating and disruptive for anyone trying to embark on sensible reforms, because actually sometimes people aren't lucky with their local hospital, and it would make more sense to close, you know, the accident and emergency into centralised services. But you never get a hospital closure that the local politician, or indeed the local sort of vocal population are going to support, and so you end up with services remaining even when it's not particularly economical to do so.
Isabel, in your upcoming book, you demonstrate how the NHS has been a battleground for some of the fiercest political contests of our time. As we look forward to an election, possibly in 2024, maybe sooner, or indeed a leadership election just within the Conservative Party, how is the NHS going to figure?
I think it will figure very highly because you are already getting headlines about the number of people who are dying while on NHS waiting lists. You're seeing this really interesting phenomenon of people crowdfunding for private medical treatment. So private medical insurance has gone up and down depending on who's in government, the state of the NHS, but actually people who are paying up front rather than taking out insurance for an operation that they need but have been told they have a year to wait for, and in that time they worry that they're going to get sicker or that their quality of life is going to plummet. They just can't wait in pain for that long, so they're going onto these GoFundMe sites and so on to try to cover their private healthcare themselves. And so when I talk to people in the health service and when I talk to switched on politicians about this, they see the NHS as being in it's probably its greatest existential crisis since its foundation, even greater than at the turn of the century in 2000, when people like Alan Milburn, Tony Blair were genuinely worried that public support for the NHS was just going to disappear. Public consent was going to disappear, and you'd get middle classes opting out. And the consent of the middle classes was really important at the time of the foundation of the health service. And so we're back in that place again now. You're going to have a lot of people getting very upset in hustings, in election question times and so on, about their mother who has been left to die by 4 cancelled operations, which was one of the things, the Mavis Skeet case that prompted a big revolution in the health service back in 2000. That said, it isn't necessarily the case that the NHS always wins elections for parties, and that's the risk for Labour, is that they could end up talking about the NHS while not actually reassuring the public on anything else. You look at the 1992 election, where the NHS was a key part of Labour's campaign, didn't win them that election. So in terms of a political battleground for actually winning an election, I think there's a caveat there, but it will feature really heavily in the campaign.
One last question for you, Isabel, on the politics of this. Over the past 5 or 6 years, when it comes to election time, and there have been quite a few, what politicians promise isn't reform, it's more money. And this has really increased the funding of the NHS to the point where it is now well above the OECD average. It's increasingly difficult to say that the NHS is underfunded. Do you think politicians are going to have to start offering something else? Or do you think the public may still buy into this idea that if we just give it a bit more money, and I'm thinking of the new national insurance levy, of course, that workers are paying now for the NHS catch-up and the rest of it, do people still think that the answer is more money, or are they expecting to hear something different from their politicians?
I think the way in which the public react to attempts to reform social care is quite instructive in this, in that they expect things to continue to be free, even though social care isn't free for them at the moment, and they get very upset at the idea that they might have to expect a sort of lower level of service, even though the level of service in social care is appalling as well. So I do not think that being honest with the public about the health service tends to benefit politicians. And, we saw that in the 2017 snap election with social care, where Theresa May basically tried to... I interviewed her about this for the book, and she said that the basic problem was that they tried to be honest with the electorate, and that was not something the electorate appreciated. They don't like actually being told about the state of things, and how much it is either going to cost, or how much a health service is going to have to change. And for good or bad, and you've written about this, Kate, about the problem with the sort of British emotional attachment to the NHS. Brits don't want to see a change to the model, and they don't want to see their local hospital killed, even when, as many politicians have said to me, that local hospital is literally killing people. They will still present petitions saying, don't close this hospital. And so, good luck to anyone who wants to be honest about the alternative options, but I suspect that they won't get thanked for it. I mean, just... Another example from history, Kate used to work for the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs, and they got very upset with Enoch Powell for saying that there was no point in arguing against the National Health Service as it was, because it was something that the public wanted. They wrote to him saying, "See how you have comforted our enemy." I think, if Enoch Powell had sort of cottoned on to that, then I suspect that a lot of Conservative politicians today are probably going to draw back and think, no.